Ladies, welcome to the Great Gender Debate 2015. The motion that stands before this House believes that the feminist movement should support military interventions that are likely to in between speeches. Furthermore, reserve your applause to the end of the speaker's speech. Without further ado, I would like to invite the Prime Minister from IIUM to start the motion in her name.
In the midst of hopelessness in war-torn countries, we believe that especially because these war-torn countries are usually patriarchal societies, countries where women are not being given a voice to be heard, we believe that feminist movements now have a duty to do, and not only to speak and complain about the situations that these women have to go through. We believe that feminist movements now have a duty to go and latch onto the interventions that Western movements or whatever movements that come into these countries that try to reform and change these countries. We believe that feminist movements now need to latch onto those things and forward the ideas that they feel are needed. We believe that, okay, clarifications first, right? We believe that, okay, first interventions happen, right? We believe that the intervention happens because of consideration, because of extremism, that interventions will happen anyway, regardless of the people that show motivation towards those interventions, regardless of the fact that if feminist movements don't latch onto these things will happen anyway, because there is a need, because there is a guiding within those countries anyway. And we believe that within those cases, right? Sit down. We believe that within those cases, when a war happens or military intervention happens, it's largely due to the fact that people want those interventions, right? It's because both sides believe that this is something that is needed. There's a way, this is the only way to reform the people, this is the only way to reach a conclusion, right? We believe that in these kind of cases and within these kind of countries, feminist movements need to still continue to fight for women's rights, because within these violent, extreme situations, the discussion on women dissipates. Discussion on women is not about anymore. It's on their own to talk about women's issues because they're ahead. Feminist movements on its own cannot just talk about women's rights and feel that they are suddenly going to change something because bigger things happen. Therefore, there is a need now for feminist movements to latch on these interventions to forward their process. Why is that? First, I'm going to talk to you about how this discussion of women is actually going to be able to be integrated among the discussions that the men have in these countries. I'm going to further talk to you about other ways, right? Ways that we can actually use and work with women who are already within Western countries, who know the demographics of the people on the ground. These people are going to be the people that actually will help us. They will show us the kind of appeals that the way we get on the ground. But first of all, how does feminist movements start? How will feminist movements actually enter into the discussion, right? When a war happens, when we're in those kind of countries, in that particular condition, a war, when a war happens, efforts of reconstruction are things that come hand in hand with war. Even during the war, already planned how to reconstruct. More often than not, all the authorities are within those countries, are within the intervene, are within the powers of those people. Now, it's important that if feminist movements don't come into the picture and latch on to these people who intervene, what's going to happen is, more often than not, the leaders, the village leaders are all men. Therefore, money and reconstruction, the power of reconstruction is only going to be within these men. The difference is, when you have feminist movements and voices of women within people who intervene. What you do then is you're going to be able to tell these village leaders, even if you have to give this money to village leaders who are men, you then can give them a trade-off. We will reform your country, we will do certain things only if you can learn the things that we want. Because the money and like the power basically is with the people who intervene. And we believe that only with this way you are able to then say, now if you want us to reform your country, if you want us to do things and have a reform, you have to then allow your women to have education. You have to build schools in rural areas. You have to then allow participation of women within politics and so on. Right? We believe that these are the kind of changes that you can only do when you have certain power, and it's not something that you can do when every student work on their own. Right? We believe this is needed. But secondly, you can only do this when you actually give them like a trade-off and you actually pander to their demands first. These people can become rebellious towards what you want because the idea of giving women education and women going to school is bizarre to them, right? But if you first tell them, no, within these schools, we're actually still going to allow your women to wear niqabs. We're still going to allow gender segregation to be there. The only thing that we want is for you to have participation within women. We believe that when you pander to their demands that way, that you can actually, like, they can actually follow the discussion better and they will actually adhere to your demands.
Given that your characterization is that the situation is a lot worse and there's a potential that it could lead to bloodshed and conflict, how does communicating the message of military intervention and women's rights lead to all the idealistic benefits that we just spoke about?
No, you fail to analyze the fact that we say that this bloodshed is going to happen anyway. Even without the furtherance of feminist movements, these things are going to happen anyway. We believe that feminist movements should not just take a moral stance and sit back. They should take a strategic stance and actually do something and actually latch on to these beliefs. The only way it will help. But second of all, if you follow them, right, what you can do is you actually what happens when you don't cooperate with these people? What are you going to do? You want to cooperate with them and tell them that the niqab is okay, segregation is okay. When you don't pander to their demands, also what you're going to do is they are going to see you as enemies and they're only going to antagonize you. So this is how we're going to let them like listen to us, right? But second of all, especially within these pieces, discussion of reformation, reconstruction, and any form of discussion is only between two men, only between a group of men. When you have feminist movements that come, and people, like even those men, are people that now have feminist interest within them, at least now there is a discussion of what is good for a woman. At least now a woman can come into that discussion and realize that what is it that they really want. They really want education. But they don't really want to enter male university. Okay, with just an alternate, we know when a woman into these kind of discussions, we need to know what the people on the ground want. Why they do that is because you can actually use women who have run from these local countries and made it okay with who are in Western democracies, who have run away from these countries. You can use these women to actually dig into the demographic and the demographic of the people on the ground. That side is going to tell us that we are only worsening the violence. What we say is that the people on the ground more often than not are not okay with the violence within their country and want military intervention and Western intervention. What we do is we help the people on the ground. Even if the people don't want and we don't know that these are what the people want, at least we help because we do still pander to their demands and we believe we do it better this way.
To thank the Prime Minister for his speech, now I would like to call upon the Leader of Opposition from Team UT Mara to Moya Karumani to begin the case of the opposition. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to the entirety of Yuva's speech, in no point in her speech did she ever justify what the feminist movement is. I mean, as the support of the feminist movement immediately directly links mental lives of these is conflict of women's rights with that you guys have supported. But before that, firstly, let's deal with this, right? Because essentially, when you mentioned in his speech, that there is already a political will to create change in these countries, and essentially you can create some form of reform, and essentially these reformations are popular if you guys want to create it. But if that's the case, we do not see the essential aim of the feminist movement immediately wanting to take a stand and buy into these movements, considering that you can already enter these countries without entering into the message or the goal that you want to do it because of women's rights. Therefore, if your goal is just to immediately change the political landscape of that country and to create change immediately, we do not think you immediately need to attach the goal of that intervention of women's rights. In fact, what we are arguing is that you make these patriarchal structures even more defensive, more sort of imposition. You already military. We think there are objectives humanity already based on things like depression of other individuals and why that as a humanitarian aspect is a harm. In this instance, we think that sometimes the way these patriarchal structures treat women might not be as like was essentially the feminist movement has to buy in that these reformations will happen. But essentially what she missed out in her speech is the reason why this patriarchal structures would even listen to them in the first place. Because she was very idealistic and immediately just glossing over the fact that your intervention will work because you hold these people at ransom. But we tell you that the moment when these sort of ideas are tied with societal constructs and things like religion, what's going to happen is these people are going to be more on the defensive and reject the idea of ransom because they think that they are protecting a higher cause, which also translates in the way they treat women. So all your benefits, while hinged on the assumption that this might work, I just told you a reason why immediately it won't work in this instance. So we think that you needed to come up here and show us why the feminist goals will immediately be able to provide you a better playing field in supporting your military intervention. We don't think psychological government has done that. All they do is fund Firstly, what is side opening opposition support needs to be? We think that in status quo there are trends and alternatives that are already working in status quo without the need for you to immediately military intervene in these countries. We're talking things like constructive discourse, being able to rationalize societal constructs and religion as well. So that's why you have like prominent figureheads like Malala Yousafzai, who's able to create change with regards to right of education without necessarily needing to contribute a message with things like violence and with things that are linked to these things like disobedience and use of force. So we think that when you detract this movement, detract the feminist movement from those bad messages, you're more likely. First of all, what is the nature of war and what is the plight of women in this instance? Right? We think the nature of the military intervention that you're supporting right now is firstly not a black and white idea. So right now, as a feminist movement, the most important consideration is what is strategic in order to provide you a more level playing field, in order to get to get out of disproportionate position that I am in this instance. So it's often, but when you look at military intervention, it's often tied to things like not just casualties in war, but it's also tied to notions of the usage of force, which is also tied to things like disobedience and disrespectful, which is held dear by the people in these patriarchal structures. But secondly, we tell you the ability for you to justify war now becomes like the ability for you to justify women's rights in this war becomes convoluted, because often it's not a singular narrative on how you're trying to define or how you're trying to justify war. And we think it gets lost in translation the moment you're trying to justify war by just simply using women's rights. More often than not, you need a more concrete idea of how you justify war. We don't think that women's rights is always in and of war. But thirdly, we think that the harm that exists on this movement exists in a spectrum. So essentially what you have to do right now is you have to pick the most valuable and strategic outlet for you to immediately change So essentially, when you're using force to fight force, what happens is you're only going to put them on the defensive, and you're only going to make them increase the emotion of force because it ties to things like disrespectful and disrespect and disobedient. So what happens right now is they won't be able to relate to you more often than not. They think that you're being antagonistic to them, and they won't want to buy into your rhetoric. Other than you being able to get to rationalize these thought processes with them and discussing people. Before I go on,
the bulk of my speech was about why there was an incentive for these men to fight.
No, yeah, but the force that is existing right now is not tied to the notion of how big you get. It is tied to things like political reform and whatsoever. So these are all that we need to tell you. The contribution in itself is bad. Right? But lastly, how does it hurt the feminist goals or the feminist movement? Because firstly, we tell you that there will be clashes of narratives. So this is against things like the equality that feminist movement wants to fight. The moment you impose a certain idea, it's not culturally sensitive to individuals on the ground. We think that the kind of feminism, the kind of processes that you want to impose, but secondly, we also tell you that these countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, who you want on your side, essentially what happens right now is you get tied in pressure to things like, I don't need to give you rights because your rights are like concretizes emotional oppression in other which yourself we want the feminist movement to see that something relatable and like opposition. Very proud.
Call upon Mr. Shita Akash from IIUM to further the case of site opening.
There is bloodshed in war, but there is no reason to believe that even within that bloodshed, women are not abused. Women are not at the comparative losing end. When war happens, it's women who go through things like systemic rape. When war happens, it's women who face the short end of genocide. When war happens, ISIS goes and rapes 500 women, takes away their humanity. It's women who get peddled as slaves from point A to point Z. Even within war, it's horrible. That's the characterization that you need to engage with. That's the reality we're dealing with on the ground. But even if all of those were not true, we being women, being a woman is not all about the right to not be raped and the right to live. Being a woman is also about the right to be educated. Being a woman is also about the right to have the environment within which you can grow an independent mind. Being a woman is also about the right to have access to that sort of support structure. So we tell you being a woman is not about living in a rat cage only to breathe. We tell you feminist movements within these countries have an imperative to go in with the military and tell them how to do things. Because these are men who simply do not otherwise care, except about their PR. We're going to leverage that and tell women. That's the only way to go at it. This is the most strategic thing to do. But secondly, we also conduct the characterization from this side that people in these countries are happy with the alternative to begin with. You cannot tell me that people are happy with ISIS. You cannot tell me people are happy with Taliban. With Sassad, with Iraqi people who went down to the ground and cheered Iraq was a city. It is about moral dichotomies here, but this debate is not about resolving any of that. This debate is about leveraging that moral dichotomy to the best advantage of women. That completely ignores Nita's argument about what are the exact ways in which feminist movement can be used, advisory boards, with policy making voices, and how exactly they can make changes engaged. From this side, therefore, becomes, oh, you culture, resistance, and they're very defensive. That's very vague, guys, because culture itself is so subjective. Right before the arrival of Taliban, because after we were literally wearing skirts and going to the University of Kabul, they were literally free within and outside. The Taliban came and took away their freedom. So culture is itself not definitive. These people are not self-evident. But secondly, we tell you a lot of these cultural implementations are externally imposed by oppressive agents. That's why war happens in the first place, because Saddam made these people conservative, ISIS made them conservative, because Taliban made them conservative. But thirdly, and more importantly, what is therefore important is to build a support structure, right? Because that's what both sides rely on anyway. Building schools, building universities, giving them scholarships and grants. That's the sort of thing the military otherwise has no incentive to do. With this State Department billions of money, so they literally don't know what to do. They can do the wrong policies. The feminist movement that step into the boys club and show them how it is done. That those are the 2 points we need. These are structures. When you come into my perspective, I'll be emphasized on what Muniba said. Muniba's case is a very comparative case. It was about how things are really shaped and therefore how to improve them. That's the question that they have ignored, right? So we have to look at how it happens. We have told you that when what happens side by side. So for example, when the city of Tokyo is taken away, the State Department also goes in to reconstruct the city of Tokyo because they do not want the government and people to take it over by the express again. That's why they have billions of dollars invested in those areas. And that's the post-war efforts the feminist movement can probably step in the room. That's what they can tell exactly what policies to implement. That's the first thing. But second thing is therefore is, and the absence of that voice, there is a presence of absence of understanding. Because these people simply do not know. They might be very well intentioned, but they do not know how to help the women. Only the feminist movement can give them those nuances and policy implementations. But the third reason therefore is these people are irreplaceable. There is literally no one else that can do those things. But the fourth reason that we have also given was very important is the fact that these women are specialized. So case in point, the Afghan cycling is literally run by a British woman who has been there for the past 8 years. She was there when the problem was at its worst. She went down to the ground and talked to old women about why their daughter should be in this cycling team. It's literally one by one women that should win. And these are massive victories that come out of the 5% cycling team that the Afghan women cycling team is right now. That's a massive victory. Only women who are willing to give up everything for can give. And these are the women they do not empower, and we empower with feminist movement takes a voice within these movements. Yes, okay.
So we are against things like ISIS and Taliban and all these regimes that you talk about. But the important thing that you need to tell us is why you have to attack these regimes under the banner of women's rights.
That's literally the first argument Muniba gave you. The attack is going to happen anyway. Within the war, women are screwed. After the war, women are equally screwed. No one cares about this. See how women is the constant force that is left out of that equation. It's shambolic that the feminist movement doesn't care about the final result of the equation. It's just shameful. Please engage with this frustrating. Anyway, moving on. The second argument therefore is on how internal change happens at the first place. We tell you a number of things in this case. A lot of the time, US State Department, its highest amount of funding goes to Afghanistan. The second highest amount of funding goes to Iraq. The third highest amount of funding goes to, there's a pattern there, right? These are countries that they have a lot of military presence in. Because they recognize they need to change the societal infrastructure and the way people think in those countries. So we do tell you, there's a lot of resources at stake here. We have the resources. But the policies are just missing important. Because the policies are made by people who simply do not know how change is going to happen. So we tell you first, internal change is more likely under our scenario because these policies are going to be more nuanced and more catered to women. But secondly, we also feel it's extremely difficult to come back with social resistance because even at the worst case scenario, I guess in our situation, we have more education for women. But what's even worse is in these societies, it's extremely important that you take care of cultural feminism, cultural nuances that are important, that only the feminist movement has the power to do. Because you cannot tell a soldier or a general sitting down in Washington, D.C. understand the fact that the educated woman in Afghanistan really go talk to her family and convince her why that has to happen. But then again, there are many equipments that these people can use. They can use the fact that they have the money now, they can use the fact that they have the infrastructure now, they can modify this in ways we need to do. But thirdly, there are also objective reasons why they should do it. All these family hierarchical figures, they don't have men anymore, they don't have people who can earn anymore. But still, due to the way the society is, they do not want to send their women to school anymore. But secondly, I've also told you how in a matter of 40 years, these things have happened in a lot of this country. These are extremely liberal and one part of that. So those are the sorts of conversations that only and only the feminists are able to have. You need to tell white women sitting in Washington DC have any incentive or ability to do any of those things. It's in the case of hopelessness. Feminist movement is the only one that can bring them hope. You simply cannot deny it. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech, and now I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Jana Jafar from UT to further the case of side opening opposition. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is regrettable that the world that we live in right now, that there are communities around the world that is continuously oppressed, that are harmed and put in grave danger, ladies and gentlemen. Opening opposition will not prevent a world in which we will say that systemic rape and systemic discrimination against any community is in a legitimate position to take. What we argue in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, at the point in which we engage in military intervention, is it strategic as well as sustainable for the feminist movement to latch on that intervention and say that this is the dynamic we want to fight in, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we think that opening up is more to the state, right? It isn't about so much whether or not we need military intervention or not, because we will contend that sometimes we do. But we think that it is what we got. We need the feminist movement that associate or disassociate themselves from this banner that we think they should not associate themselves, because we think it defeats the larger purpose of fighting for women's rights in that area, as well as allowing feminism to grow in that particular one. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about whether the feminists have a duty to latch on to begin with. Secondly, I'm going to talk about our ability to be decent directed in any regard. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about who do you impact the most in terms of sustainability, as well as allowing the state to have a point of attack for feminist movements that are in that country, that are approximated and can be victims within their instances that can fail or succeed in sentence. So first, do the feminists have a duty to latch on? They say in the government that there is a correlation because you are a woman and you have a duty to help people who opt in. We see that the duty as a feminist movement have to extend just beyond latching on to what's easy, what's convenient, and what's violent, ladies and gentlemen. Because we think right now, at this particular juncture, the way we people in, especially in conflicted areas with the feminist movement, is often going to say, what's an ideal? It's foreign and alien because it fights for things that are presupposed that we do not understand. I mean, sexual liberation as well as sexual objectification of women. These are things that we don't relate to because the things that we need the most right now is help us to be upon the harm that we are ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, how do people perceive military intervention? It's often perceived as a bad thing because it's an imposition of standards of what we are supposed to be as a country and what other countries tell us we're supposed to be. But the second presupposition is that it requires force for you to be able to engage in a meaningful manner, for you to have outcomes that are crystallized and concretized, ladies and gentlemen. So how do people view you right now? The standard as a feminist movement right now is often attacked and populated the idea of violence. And insofar as the feminist movement being able to reach conclusive outcomes, we will always have to utilize violence in this one program. We think that this is formatted because we think that the feminist movement have to move beyond just saying that violence is the end all beyond the way we engage in that discussion. We think that they would have to be a position in this one program, especially when the position that you think is a contradictory position to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Because as a feminist movement, you argue and you preach and you say that people within these areas especially have to move away from engaging in violence, especially with regards to women, and say that you should not make them and subject them to force. But right now, what you send out is a message that says, right now in some instances, force is a good thing, and you signal to these individuals that maybe the objective metric of force can be ambiguous at a time that it's convenient for us, ladies and gentlemen. This is a position that is problematic because it shows that the position and the principles of the feminist movement often changes and is ambiguous and does not have an objective. Ladies and gentlemen, allowing is counterproductive at the point which you want to cultivate a feminist movement within that country and allow outside of that country to want to come in and engage in this cause. I'm going to move on to the third one first. Who do you necessarily impact the most, ladies and gentlemen? We think that oftentimes when you allow this attachment and competition to exist, that you attack that you harm the victims of oppression. We think right now, in stage 4, you don't need the feminist movement to come in and attach themselves to military intervention in order for you to attack power structures, ladies and gentlemen. There are other methods in which you can engage in nuance and say the methods in which you are treating women in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan are things that are illegitimate because you don't engage in recognizing human rights, ladies and gentlemen. We think what you do right now is when you have a attachment of violence, is that the visceral point of identification of war is often attached to violence first and not recognizing the rights of citizens. And it dilates the nuance in which we intellectually engage on whether or not we need feminism to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. So what you do is you harm the feminist movement within that country because they need to latch themselves upon that particular regard, right? Why? Because it's unsustainable. At this particular juncture, the alternative service responses, especially if you're in that country, becomes unsustainable. Why? We're going to get it from two different aspects. A top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, ladies and gentlemen. When you're talking about a top-down approach and you have a power structure that's patriarchal in nature and unwilling to change their characteristics and how they treat people, right now, when you take a position of utilizing force, we think, of course, they might change the consequences and say, okay, you will not treat women as badly. But we see that military intervention can occupy the country forever. And at the point which you say, we will hold you at ransom and exert violence and force because we want the feminist movement to be able to cultivate a culture, what you do right now is you put a point of identification as to who we can blame you that is direct, relatable, and proximate. That means that if you leave that country, the feminist movement that are in your country right now will be the point of targeted attacks. You are the ones that held our country at ransom. You were the ones who were the cause of reason why there were people who died in that bloodshed to begin with, ladies and gentlemen, and it's unsustainable. The bottom-up approach doesn't exist as well, right? When you talk about creating grassroots support for things like feminism and cultivating feminine rights to make shit up, is that this is problematic because oftentimes the point of this reaction is that my countrymen died or my fellow brothers died, and then you often directly attach it to the feminist movement coming in, ladies and gentlemen, which means you don't cultivate the environment that you want so dearly.
When the global feminist movement moves into India, they're talking as things like great culture because that's more important. Similarly, we told you about countries like Afghanistan, they don't talk about empowerment and education. Okay, right now, in countries like India and great culture, you didn't need to engage in military intervention and attach violence because the message that you were showing to those countries is that we abhor violence and the ability for you to utilize force to subjugate women in that particular regard. Why do you now take a contradictory position and say we are okay in instances where it's convenient to us, ladies and gentlemen? Lastly, will we have any ability to intervene and facilitate help? We say yes. At the point in which we have systemic rape and systemic discrimination for individuals, other actors existing in the international power play will want to have political will. And you can see that political will exists right now, ladies and gentlemen. But we do that right now. What you do is that the point of intervention is based on one myopic position of war and one myopic position of what do we do in this particular regard. And we think that you combine the message, right? Because right now, we see that we only militarily intervene, especially as a feminist movement, at the point in which you reach the standard that was set upon you, ladies and gentlemen, which means that the barrier of entry is often ambiguous and low. Because in some instances, you were saying there were needs for things like scholarship and other instances, systemic needs and everything. The inability for us to objectively determine the attachment of the feminist movement as well as violence in this particular regard means that the ability for us to take the feminist movement, especially in this area, more seriously, a lot more diluted because you can't pinpoint the identifying process in which the feminist movement engages in this conflict to begin with. We think that as a feminist movement, you have to be strategic in how you position yourself, as well as be strategic in where you choose to disassociate yourself. I will never be part of it.
Her proposition for a speech, and now to open the closing half of this debate, I call upon Ryan Rahman, the member of government from Asia Pacific University. Lydia Uma, the member of government from Asia Pacific University, to begin her case. Thank you.
Yes. We think that opening opposition and what the opposition bench as a whole needed to do, that somehow organic change can occur. In a particularly oppressive country, what exactly is their incentive to change? They bring up Saudi Arabia, which I'm glad they did, because they were telling fine. The Saudi Arabia, women now can drive. But that is still attached to the narrative that the man has to be there, ladies and gentlemen. And that minor change isn't the sort of victory that can claim. Because the sort of minor victory comes after years and years of progressiveness, ladies and gentlemen. We think that sort of slow change isn't acceptable, and now we'll tell you how military intervention will change this, right? We tell you that also where can military intervention be? There needs to be clarification, right? The severe harm, and there is an idea words, right? We tell you where your discussion has failed or can't even exist, where legislative changes can't even occur. Then we think it is fine to use violence, ladies and gentlemen. Rather than for the individuals on the ground who face continuous and severe harm, where they are viewed as a burden, as a possession, just as a sex object, we think that's an unacceptable view for us to have, right? To allow for this oppression to continue. And this whole idea of like being told that ransom, targeted attacks, we think that an instance where feminist movement feels the need to step in means that the problem is so severe that they are willing to make that trade-off, ladies and gentlemen, and we are fine with making that trade-off. And the whole fact that they bring up, like my countrymen are dying, shows exactly to you how the focus will then be on nationalistic things, right? And not exactly women's rights. The focus will be, after the military entry ends, is on repairing and stabilizing the government. The prioritization then will never happen on women's rights, regardless of the existence of political will, ladies and gentlemen, because the focus is shifted to what they perceive as more important things, ladies and gentlemen. I have two arguments for you today. Firstly, I'm going to discuss the scenarios in which a military intervention succeeds and a military intervention fails, and that will be our exclusive extension. Secondly, I'm talking about the new narratives or the standards of deterrence that we attach when we have feminist movements in a military intervention. No PR, sit down. Anyway, so firstly, on the first scenario, right? First, we agree with this whole feminist movement are suppressed by negative rhetoric. So let's talk about how they're currently judged, especially when the military intervention succeeds. We think especially now, when feminist movements are judged on an upward, the fact that military intervention succeeds means that the patriarchal men under status quo often shut out these voices because they're in control of the economic, social, and political power that exists, right? We think that when we take radical action where all else fails, we show to you that chaos is necessary for change. Because under their paradigm, the message for basic human rights, as I tell you, gets lost under the chaos and the one from peace. We think that our message from our action, when military action succeeds, is far-reaching, that it becomes unacceptable for you to continually oppress these individuals just based on these cultural values that you possess, these religious values that you possess. We think it is a fair trade-off because you have to acknowledge this right as we form the government when the feminist movement succeeds in this military intervention. Before I go on, show closing.
How do you negotiate with Assad in the middle of a conflict when you've already declared that you're opposing?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How do you negotiate with Assad in the middle of a conflict when you've already declared you're opposing?
Ladies and gentlemen, we think that the message we send is far more important than regardless of the conflict that occurs. Because what? We think that where non-radical actions have been, where you try to pass changes to legislative measures, or you try to voice out, and those things have failed. We think that's where radical action needs to occur, right? But let's talk about the second scenario where the military intervention fails, right? We tell you that this will garner attention of the women and crowd. Because why? We tell you that then they will need to question themselves, right? Why do feminism support military intervention? This questioning of themselves leads to one thing to know. And we tell you that the differences, right? Because there will be people on the ground who fight their president as all sides concede, right? When the people are frustrated with no change, we think that we galvanize these individuals to continue the fight. Because if even the feminist movement who normally goes through all these changes are willing to take radical action, that shows it is worth it to continue fighting, ladies and gentlemen. We think that even if people give up, the international scrutiny that exists, the further pressure that exists from the outside, and that feminist movements can still pressure from the side is extremely important, right? Because in the same way, we put you a parallel example about how the European Union pushes Turkey to change their oppressive laws on women in exchange for Euro membership, right? In the same way, we tell you that after military intervention, when a country is drained of resources, as we put this in war-torn countries, and you need to outsource, right? That is the same way pressure applies, right? For the outside community to continue to trade with you or to continue help you to rebuild your country, there is an incentive for this international scrutiny to occur and to push you further, right? But we tell this why exclusively, where feminist movement also gives a platform, ladies and gentlemen, to fully push for their goals and to describe the suffering of these women, because we allow now to shape these governments that exist in men. Secondly, I'll talk to you about the new narrative that exists in the standards of deterrence, right? Because now we tell you that even women's rights is something that we can use for military intervention. Why is this important? Because it is easy to say that we can fight through this change is too slow in India. See this having an increase of just reported domestic violence or reported cases of rape, right? But they tell you that in severe oppression of women, now there's a heavy deterrence because we're talking about war-torn countries. We think that in those circumstances where dictators want to keep hold of that power and where that conflict would threaten that hold of power, there is more incentive to keep their people happy and more incentive to take into consideration this sort of oppression so that they wouldn't have military interventions. In the same way, we have a parallel example. So the Arab Spring fueled the change for democracy. And even when certain cases have failed, the fight continues to go on. The negative narrative against dictators still exists, and people on the ground are still willing to fight for their rights. We think that's where our differences occur. When we tell you that when we allow for military intervention, we show a strong message that we need to care about women's rights, ladies and gentlemen. We think that also that the discourse can take place where there's people on the ground speaking for feminist rights and continuing to push for these changes, ladies and gentlemen. So what have I told you? I've told you three things, right? I've told you two scenarios where the military intervention succeeds and where the feminist movement will judge and will have a positive outcome. Secondly, I told you about why military intervention fails and how even then we still have a positive discourse and we can still push for more changes. I've told you about the new narrative and the standards of deterrence that can improve. If you are for women's rights, if you are for us to change, for these women who are pressed on the ground, ladies and gentlemen, you will go with closing government.
I thank the member of government for her speech. Now, I invite Mubarak Wasi from IIUM 1, member of opposition, to begin the case for closing opposition. Here.
It's interesting that discourse seems to be the most important argument on three sides of this house. When we are fighting literally to save more lives, this debate happens in a world where ideologically hope something like equality. This debate happens in a world where we are trying to convince us not to systematically rape people. Few things that I want to talk about. First, I will talk about the scenario in which war doesn't lead to success, a contribution that no one will be able to create. Second, I'll tell you why in the process, even if there is success, there's too much loss to be had. Third, I'll do the best case scenario of success, and that's fair. But before all that, I just need to clarify that they can't get rid of the assumption that the feminist movement supporting something doesn't mean that military intervention is like more likely. It is more likely to happen if an organization grants its support, right? Why? For two reasons. One, because these organizations lobbying power. We're talking about organizations and businesses are likely to go ahead and back up their stance of lobbying power, maybe push congressmen to vote something. Second, organizations take a stance to go ahead and identify the use of movements. Let's talk about one, but likelihood that it won't succeed. So first, we must understand that while it seems like wars will succeed, that was all wars perpetrated by the West. Unfortunately, wars have scenarios which you can't comprehend, which you can't foresee. And that means a lot of wars are successful. So for example, you have seen this success until we couldn't have happened that the situation like ISIS would have happened, which would have lead to a lot more consequences. And we done that, right? In Libya, like killing off the Gaddafi would have meant that, like, seriously, there could be anything worse than that. And now we have multiple rival factions like in Libya right now, creating more and more victims every on the outside. It seems like it's likely. There's absolutely no guarantee, not only that, it's often very likely that it won't lead to success. So we think that consideration must also be taken into account. And they contribute to a process where they create a war that they can't stop, and they eventually perpetually create conflict and misery for women on the ground if not death. So that's first context. Second context, let's assume that in the long run they're able to succeed. But even in that scenario, you must understand that war is often a long-run process. Iraq has been there for almost not long, since 2015. In that scenario, ladies and gentlemen, the process however, in this instance, the point at which you take a start, you say military intervention must happen, means you're essentially taking a side. You're saying, yes, the US should move in. What does this mean? Multiple territories and countries are often controlled by different factions within that country. That means Assad is still in control of Tripoli. Assad is still in control of Damascus. So in that instance, you need a ability, for example, to get some concessions from him. That becomes a lot less likely in a scenario where you can't, where Assad knows that you support the rival faction, where you are seen even more suspicious of a comparative, that you are seen as an agent of the West. That means any kind of demand or negotiations to want to enter Assad, for example, giving girls a bit more refugees, maybe slowing down on the idea of systematic people. The situation where you are part of the enemy under you. So we that scenario there as well. But also, in fact, it makes much more likely that women will be attacked by the other side. Because if you explicitly state that the purpose of your military intervention was to create more rights for women, the point is Assad will make it a point to show that your intervention was a failure. That is why you will make it a point to systematically target women to show that Western interventions are systematically failing, so that people behind them can pull back the countries up. So you think you create more and more incentive for women to be systematically targeted within war zones. We think systematic rape of people are likely to happen. We are talking about more and more conditions, for example, being attacked by ISIS, because that is the indicator that ISIS is winning and the objective for isn't being fulfilled. Sure.
Under your side, maybe Saddam was thoughtless, maybe not. But within that power struggle, what voice does feminist movements have if they remain neutral and don't pick a side? What power do feminist movements have to actually make a change when they remain neutral and don't pick a side within that power struggle?
Comparative feminist movement have very good power on this side. But under your own, women didn't. When you went into war, they didn't. They were raped. And I think the point at which you even identify that you want Assad to come down, that would have created a situation where even more women would have died in Iraq, because Saddam would have made the point systematically target women. So comparatively, they would be far worse off in the world where the feminist movement systematically said, yes, we support this movement against Assad. We think that's very, very important. Finally, in terms of it succeeding, first question that we must ask is, even in the instance where they are able to garner the most amount of rights for women, whether or not the process was worth it to begin with. Because yes, some women might end up getting a conflict, but why was the process worth it? Why was the process of increasing bloodshed and missile attacks on individual civilians who die worth it? They said violence is correct because what you're doing to them is unfair. Yes, it's unfair, but it's also unfair on those women who die as a result of the bloodshed you caused by creating a conflict in Syria, right? And those are battery guns that you create have absolutely nothing to do with those oppressions that you talk about. So you create unfair victims out of that war, and we question whether or not that process in itself was fair, even if the consequence they have is great. But then, let's talk about the consequence. Why making a consequence is pretty terrible too. So even in that instance, ladies and gentlemen, in a situation where you're able to go in, we think you systematically stop any ability, in the best case scenario, you systematically stop any ability for the feminist movement to have long-term equality. Why? Because you perpetuate this idea that it is a Western construct, because it is identified with what the Western intervention did, right? So what does this mean? This means, for example, because of colonial history, because the love of culture that people have, they cannot tie the idea of feminism to a localized idea anymore. That necessarily means the foreign concept, and that's the primary problem we have in spreading feminism within those nations as well to begin with, because it is seen as a Western construct, because it is seen as something not localized to them. The point which you identify the Western intervention, that is when you often local leaders don't allow them to come in and change the syllabuses because it might be indoctrination by the West. These are realistic things that happen and remove all ability for you to change. On a comparative, even if you take like all the discussion and the stuff we talk about, I really don't see why that not happen. Why not giving an excuse? Why not taking law? Like the point is that all the discussion fight for freedom, but it's best happens as when you don't take an active start. Because a lot of people will really not like, oh, to do this, I really do analyze and do like analysis of who would like to do this.
I thank the member of opposition for his speech and now call upon Rahman Rahman, the government whip, to end the case of the government.
It is completely shameful that our consequences and outcomes of war is not considering the fact that women can suffer after the fact that we do war and in faith is considered the fact that these societies still remain patriarchal and women still suffer under this society after reformation, these are tactics we no longer consider war. You cannot shut the blame on feminism for war because war are bringing a society that is good on us, a society that is capable of art. Because war, yes, it is necessary for good outcome. Wars, but there's a good outcome, and I have feminism also been in this scenario. But really and because we do not care about what kind of negativity as long as we can provide women all those necessities that they require. We are completely supporting the military intervention in the very first place. Today I'm going to talk about two things in general. First of all, I'm going to talk about how even with this allow feminists to support. I'll talk about comparative or rather the role of opposition. In fact, if you are positive exposed, and I'll also show comparative over there to begin with. So first of all, let's talk about the whole idea of the six. Opening opposition, try to talk about the idea of culture. There's two layers of analysis towards this, right? First of all, when we feminists override culture, we believe feminism has supported the women themselves are completely okay with it, and there is no level of oppression in it. And we believe there are others who argue otherwise if there are systematic oppression. And we believe in that scenario, when cultures are really oppressive, we believe it is completely fine for us to come and say thank you for those overriders to gain women those support and support structures in the society because they talk about that this will cause much more prolongation in terms of keep the burden because change where we can actually come out and use force to effectively make changes on this because now the resistance towards these power structures that are in these societies are much less resilient compared to when they reform again and now feminists have to come again as an external force trying to make those changes on it's much harder to make those but under our community it's much more easily achievable when this is much more diluted, much more less resilient, and we can easily do for them. And we believe the reformation of this country itself can consider these factors in general and move forward on this weekend. That is how we deal with these people. That is how we even identify all the patriarchal natures that are present within those cultures
and effectively argue against them. We care about international scrutiny, and we believe international scrutiny works best when political structures are less visible on the figure. The fact Assad doesn't feel international scrutiny as much because its political structure already acts as a very huge shield on the figure. Really, when it comes down to new political reformation, international scrutiny is at its best on the figure because these people haven't even constructed their political shield and cannot necessarily escape the scrutiny that feminists now can provide, and women rights have to be considered when they come into power and they want to be power various on the figure. And then the whole idea of westernization, we believe that even if there is this idea of westernization, we believe that during intervention, there is correlation between the intervener and the people on the ground over there. We believe women have never been part of this correlation to begin with because they never felt confident of joining these things. We believe the moderates will now have a reason to join this coalition and actively help them. And we believe throughout this participation and discourse, we believe cultural privilege might be important toward these women who still remain on the speaker. And we believe it doesn't have to be completely Western because now if we provide that there is an avenue for discourse, and it's not just Westerners coming here, setting up standards, we believe that is completely fine. That doesn't set you up with the standard of calling them completely Western. But before I move on to talk about discourse, so, if your goal is to create an environment that is palatable for the rights of women after this conflict, how do you plan to do so when the power structures as well as the people on the ground often associate those movements with things like violence and the military intervention that's happening?
Oh my God, now I'm going to have to talk about what those countries look like after intervention. It goes to the extent that even constitution amendments can be made after post-conflict on the speaker. Power structures are already diluted down, and we need to address the root cause of those problems on the speaker. Because sometimes it could be even constitutional problems that disadvantages women. We believe now these things can be addressed and make the society's outcome much more valuable to begin with. But let's move on to discourse right now. Discourse is what's really important in this debate, right? Because in the end, we want to initiate the fact that military intervention is just not about intervening to reform a government on those figures. Because let's face it, we still consider fighting for women's rights as an external thing, and we do not consider them matters on those figures. We do not consider them as important in state of this is where right? Now, intervention itself has a standard on those figures that we should intervene. Is it legit to intervene if you're oppressing women in your country because they should have equal treatment as to the reason why they intervene. Unless they support the idea of military intervention, support the idea of necessity to bring in change on those figures. We believe countries like India and Saudi get away with oppression because these are not the standards, so they should be getting out by military intervention on those figures. The fact that military intervention itself is a huge difference in many countries from why not women's rights to be part of that because these countries violate women's rights more or less every time and we should have the right to go in and make those changes. Go with the side that provides outcome on this. Don't stick with the side that just talks about this good but necessarily doesn't achieve anything and doesn't necessarily do anything to move the stigma around.
To conclude this debate, I call the opposition way to end the case of the closing opposition.
We thought we could come in and stamp out extremism in Libya, and then something worse than Gaddafi happened. We thought we could stamp out extremism, but then there's possibly the tragedy that was out of grade happened. You cannot stamp out extremism by also being radical in your approach. Side government will never have tangible changes because people will continue to suffer until whenever and wherever from the effects of war. We think that's has been a question the government side has not been able to answer. There are three issues in this debate, and why I'll tell you why we solve them, and this is why CEO wins. Number one, I'll tell you why it's pivotal for you to remain neutral, at which point you are able to negotiate with individuals that you need to change. Number two, I'll tell you why we can't just operate on hunch and say, guys, because it is likely to improve rights, we should likely go to war also. No, likelihood is also not a risk you are supposed to take, especially when you're talking about lives and collateral damage. Lastly, I'll deal with something OG wanted to hit your entire case upon. How do we protect cultural nuances while trying to improve the lives of women? We'll deal with all of those issues, but let's first deal with neutrality. We tell you it's unequivocal that you have to be neutral at which point you want to enter the conflict, when you want to participate in the discussion to resolve that conflict. You are also talking about patriarchal societies who have many positions of influence, who will be rigid and who will be bigoted to an extent according to your views. But you cannot come into that table of discussion already thinking of that person, starting off at a back foot and demonizing that person. You have to maintain neutrality. If you concede that military interventions will happen anyway, but you do not have to associate yourself with that, we think you will not be able to then particularly empower your argument to help and say that this is good for both sides, when you are literally saying, guys, what you're doing is wrong, I'm opposing you. But it's not just that. We told you this minimum substantive that was never engaged with towards women by side CG. Yeah, it's by side CG, yeah. The idea that at which point you are now seen as an individual who was stupid enough to fight me, but now failed, you will be specifically targeted even more. That's why women in those societies where you already have positions of influence being, like hoarded by people in ISIS or radical groups or radical factions, those individuals will specifically target women as well. These women will be necessarily more hurt and more worse off under your paradigm. Let's not just talk about rights, right? We're talking about immediate effects within the war and the kind of strategies and tactics they won't necessarily be able to utilize. Because you were stupid enough to fight me and you were foolish enough to think you could win. You think those kinds of rhetorics will be empowered by the radicals who will then be further entrenching their power. But secondly, we think more power is lost, at which point a feminist movement that is supposed to be the beacon of hope for a lot of disenfranchised women, at which point you, as an unwilling victim, who was made an unfair victim to a war you did not consent to, because your father died in the crossfire, because your sister died in the crossfire. Now, feminist movement that is supposed to be the broader spectrum that is available to you as a beacon of hope and justice, you can't even rely on them to be your beacon. I see as individuals who also supported the war, who supported the military intervention. Problematic. That's why women are systematically worse off under the government side. You want outcomes, those outcomes will be minuscule at best, but more likely to be non-existent. Second issue, why do we need not operate on a will or operate on a hunch that it is likely to work? Because a lot of military interventions already make that the basis and they have faith. But at which point, feminist movements attach themselves to the idea of likelihood without considering the possible consequences that are most likely, we think that's particularly detrimental. Why? Because you are seen as a person who sympathizes with the West. You are seen as a US sympathizer. You are seen as following a Western concept, which means even if you have platforms under your paradigm that military interventions happen to bring in, and I give a mic to a woman and a woman cannot speak in a public forum without discrimination, all of your arguments will be further systematically clamped down. We're talking about mullahs, which will necessarily prevent you from talking about contraception, because you are seen as an advocate of a Western or foreign concept. That's why even if you want people to have discourse right now, that discourse will never amount to anything worth fighting for. That discourse will not be tangible. But secondly, we think reasons why it would not be good in the long run as well. It is because you have to then question the cost of that particular military intervention. Families get displaced, women get raped. All of these individuals, the voices of those women who never consented to the war will never be treated under your paradigm. For example, we posit to you that if you ask their families whether they wanted the war, a vast majority of the case, these women will say they did not ask for the war, because that was not the best form of outcome that they could have gained. Right? You see, all of these long-term effects are like imaginary, because if individuals do see that, they won't get deterred and now stop using their women. There's more likely more propensity for them to watch to clench on to their powers and not give up, to think NGOs, like what CEO said. We think even if this
discuss it. Before I move on, Shita.
ISIS and Taliban will keep raising opposition movement and minor ethnicities under both sides. So how can the feminist movement change things if they don't join hands with people who are opposing them?
You negotiate, right? Feminist movements can build schools, come and help. You do not have to support military intervention, which is the most radical form there is. You can still go in, have NGOs come in, stop your girls, and not have cultural nuances be sacrificed because of a radical approach, which is the last issue. How do we best protect cultural nuances? It is not going to have a knee-jerk reaction of individuals now wanting to clamp down on discussion or even your NGOs. It means at which point individuals do not feel like they are being lynched off of their beliefs and at the same time occupied by the West. That is when you are able to properly reconcile your faith and your values. For years, this has been the ultimatum for women in the Middle East. You either have your rights or you have your values. Or you either have your religion or you have your values. You can sacrifice one and you have one at the expense of the other. That's not what has to happen. But that's the kind of narrative that we project under your paradigm, and which one is seen as a Western position, and which one is seen as a foreign kind of prospect. It is not. All of these legal guys can help women be neutral when it comes to consent to the harms that women are facing. Does not mean you consent to the patriarchy. It means you are going about it in the most diplomatic and rational manner, which is the only way you can ever have tangible changes for women. Long enough have women been given ultimatums. The only way you can solve them is not to provide them with a backfoot even more, not to give them another military intervention and think that things will magically happen. It will not. Worse off things will happen. That's why you cannot stamp out extremism. You cannot stamp out patriarchy. You have to weed it out, but you have to weed it out with the women from within. Thank you.
Thank you.